Welcome, everybody, to the ShopNotes Podcast. It's episode 22. I'm your host, Phil Huber. Today, I'm joined with the usual suspects, John Doyle and Logan Whitmer. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about workshop gimmicks that actually turned out to be useful tools. So join us for the ShopNotes Podcast.
This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
Once again, this is a topic inspired by Logan Whitmer, so I'm going to have him take the lead on it because I want to see where he's going to go.
Sure. Okay, so I feel like in the world of woodworking, so I have a couple hobbies. Obviously, woodworking is one of them.
Sure.
Fishing is another, fishing and hunting. And in fishing, we have a saying that new lures are more to catch the fisherman than the fish, right? Like, complete marketing tactic. Fish don't care. People have been catching fish for thousands of years, right? They don't really care. So I feel like, and I got asked this a few times during seminars that I would give out at the Woodsmith store. A couple of my online live seminars, people ask me about certain things. And I feel like sometimes that's been my answer. Is like, honestly, the corrugated soles is one that always pops up. Are the corrugations on the sole of a plane really do anything? I was like, I mean, theoretically, yes. But I think it was probably more of a marketing tactic to push more hand planes, right?
Right.
But there's been a few things that I've found, one in particular I'll show you in a second, that I'm like, holy crap, this thing actually works, and it actually works really well. So I've been telling you guys that I've been working on this poker table, okay? I've been talking about it for a few weeks now. I feel like a few months, because it has been a few months. But I actually just put the first coat of oil on it last night on the top, and I think tomorrow I'm going to have one of you guys help me carry it into the spray booth to spray it. But a element of this poker table was routing in some, I don't want to call them chip holders, but they're like dishes where each player would sit. So you could like have somewhere to put your phone, put your poker chips, maybe a bowl of popcorn if you guys are just playing board games or whatever, So I used a bowl and tray bit, okay? And they work well, right? I mean, bowl and tray bits, Phil, and you and I talked about this the other day when we were filming a little bit. They're one of those bits that you like when you use it. It's like, I love this thing, but I hate this thing at the same time, right? Like they work really well to create those recesses and those dishes and stuff.
Yeah.
They make an absolute freaking mess.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, you really only might be removing like 3/8 of an inch of material, but it goes all over. Like my entire basement is covered in like walnut dust right now. And they also can, if they're not sharp, they can burn, right? They can burn really well or really badly. So
especially when you go around corners, like if you hit a hard corner on a template or something like that, it gets a little scorchy.
Yeah, and
place to sand.
Yeah, it is. It's a super hard place to sand, and that's actually where I'm going with this whole thing. But Phil, I know you had did some a Mancala board for your son for Christmas or birthday or something like that.
Yeah. And
that was in some lip disc, and it just burned. And it's like it's impossible. It's impossible to sand it for the most part.
Right.
But there are two things I found that I'm like, I bought these and I thought these were the dumbest things in the world. And they ended up being really useful for sanding these dishes, okay? So the first is one of these stupid guys. It's one of those oscillating tools, right? And it's one of those tools that you see more in
infomercials.
Well, yeah, infomercials, or more like in the construction market, I guess, or renovation, home renovation. Let's put it there. That's where I see it a lot. Like guys zipping out drywall, to put in a new gang box or something silly like that.
Right.
And there's some of these tools that I'm like, doesn't really have a good practical use in a woodworking shop. Not the case, because this is one that I bought. We had this at the magazine for a number of years, and it never got used. So I bought this at one of our intercompany auctions, and I think I paid $10 for this, and I got the flashlight, which is actually what I really wanted, was the Ryobi flashlight, because it's the cordless set I use at home. But I was like, I think I got the sanding pad with it. So I took off the blade, put the sanding pad on. This thing's freaking phenomenal. This was like, it was like the perfect thing to get in and sand the bottom of those dishes. And this is not a random orbit. It's just a little vibrating like a palm sander, you know. Yeah. But it's enough that it knocked off some of those scallops and little ridges that you kind of tend to get with those bowl and tray bits.
Right.
And the edges are soft enough that I could get into the corners just a little, just enough. And this thing was phenomenal. And on a side note, we had another project recently that used one of these a lot, and it's one that I just finished doing corrections on, and that's our boat that's coming out. Right. Mark used one of these guys. So you guys will see this when the next issue of Woodsmith come out. But we have a plywood boat that we built, and it works phenomenal. I have the sunburn from a day of fishing to prove it. But Mark, our shop craftsman, ended up using an oscillating tool for a lot of jobs on that boat. So you guys will have to check out that article, see how he used it. But not something I ever thought I would use a whole lot of. But it worked phenomenally well, and I was super glad to have it. Right. The other one is one that I just thought about because I was using it in the same bowl and tray recesses. Number of years ago, I took a wood carving class with Al Breed out at Mark Adams School of Woodwork. And he suggested we bring some card scraper blanks. Now, I don't remember what I had going on at the time. I just didn't have time to cut a bunch of card scraper blanks to cut, custom profiled scrapers for the carvings we were doing. But what I did have was a credit card and a computer that I could get on Rockler. And Rockler has these micro scrapers. Okay, and I have them in my basement. I didn't think about it. I should have brought them up. But they have this little plastic sleeve of micro card scrapers that are like 2 inches long, and they have a bunch of different profiles. There's an oval, there's a square, there's kind of a flared rectangle, and then there's a tiny little gooseneck one. They work phenomenally well. They're super thin, super easy to roll a hook off of. And it's one of those things I was like, yeah, who's ever going to use these? And then it saved my butt. It didn't save my butt. It saved my fingertips from a bunch of sanding. So
sure.
So I was super impressed. Super glad I made those impulse buys.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yes, phenomenal. That's right, John.
So to be clear, you're not knocking Ryobi as a brand. It was just the oscillating tool.
Completely
that seemed totally the category itself. That
yes, and honestly, I had bought my dad one of these things for Father's Day, probably 8 years ago when they first kind of came out.
Sure.
And I don't remember what we were doing, but I was like, oh, he's gonna really love this for the project. And we used it for whatever project he was doing. I can't remember what we were doing with it, but anyways, and I was like, okay, yeah, hack job, kind of home remodel tool.
Yeah.
But nope, love it.
Yeah, the Dremel tools are kind of that way too. It's like, oh yeah, that's great for like crafting and hobbyists, but we found a lot of ways to use that in some of our projects or modify it to do, more woodworking type stuff. So
that's cool. Yeah, my only familiarity with the oscillating tool is how it's very similar to the tool that is used to remove casts from your kids when they break bones.
Exactly, yeah.
So
you can do it at home.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Save that deductible.
Pays for itself.
Until you have to go pay and have stitches put in.
Yeah.
That's where they get you.
Although that crazy blade that they use for the casts is kind of interesting because they always show it like, this isn't going to cut you. And he's like holding his hand against it while he turns it on. And it's like, okay, that's weird.
Yep. That's funny. Well, have you guys have any of those like things that you bought and you're like, this is stupid. Why did I buy this? And then it ends up working how it's like, it works how it was meant to work.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. These are probably like a long time ago and they seem ridiculous now, but like the original Craig pocket hole jig that was like the little tiny single piece of plastic, and it's like that like the introduction to pocket holes is like, yeah, what's this little piece of plastic and metal gonna do? And then you do it and you're making pocket holes. It's like, oh, this is actually pretty clever and works out pretty well. So, I mean, obviously it's come a long way since the original and whatnot. But I remember, first getting into woodworking and discovering that the original Craig pocket hole jig and thinking that was pretty clever. And then I think moving along through woodworking, I remember when they first came out with the smaller 12-volt battery like drills and stuff. It's like, oh, these are for babies, and it's like if it doesn't have a huge car battery, at the bottom of it, it's not like powerful enough. And then you use them, and like, this actually works out pretty well, and it's a lot lighter. You don't have a car battery strapped to your hip and trying to run the drills, and then moving on to the battery powered nail guns. They've come a long way too. That it's like, oh my gosh, this is handy. I don't have to power up the air compressor just to shoot a couple pin nails or whatnot. So that's kind of some of the surprise stuff that I've come across. Nothing too crazy, but not like the ShamWow or anything. But
well, and to be fair, we use the battery powered stuff a lot on the show, like the nailers. They work fantastic. You're not gonna go trim a house with it. Right. But if you're trimming a house, you have an air compressor, you're gonna have an air nailer out, right?
Right. And 200 feet of hose and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. But for working on a project where you don't want to drag a hose across, a finished workpiece.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Or run a compressor inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Run it for 15 minutes to shoot 2 nails.
Exactly.
No, I will say that because I thought, it felt like for a while with cordless tools, it was this kind of arms race of, it starts off with, 14 volt tools. And then all of a sudden it didn't take long. And we're like these 36 volt, giant nuclear weapons of tools. And you're right. They look like, car batteries attached to the bottoms of tools. And it was like, well, the bigger the voltage, the better, man. And then with the lithium ion batteries came out, and then you had those little 12-volt ones, like you said, John. It was like, hey, little drill, what do you want to be when you grow up? But they're the ones that we use all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think last week I mentioned I have that 80-volt cordless chainsaw from Harbor Freight. That thing's phenomenal. Like 15 years ago, you would have never. I say you would have never. Porter Cable probably had one in the works with the huge honking battery, but 15 years ago, the motors weren't there. Like you could not have a cordless chainsaw like that wasn't like a plug-in, right?
Right.
But the technology with brushless motors is there now, and that, I mean, the 80-volt battery is pretty beefy. It's like putting a lawn tractor battery into a handle. But it works phenomenally well for what it's used for, Right. And I guess that's the thing is, as long as you're using it for what it's designed for, a lot of these things actually work pretty well.
Yeah. So I have a few items that I was thinking of that were kind of gimmicky, and one of the first ones is the these little doweling jigs. Rockler makes them, Bighorn Tool makes them, sells them in variety, and they come in different sizes. Like they have for those of you who aren't watching this on the radio, there's a metal block that has a pair of holes in it, and then a acrylic guide that has 3 lines, a center line, and then a center line on each of the 2 holes in the block. So they're specific to a given size of dowel that you're going to be working with. There's a lot of doweling jigs out there that try to do everything and have replaceable inserts for 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2, and whatever.
Yeah.
So this Rockler one is inexpensive and just does the 2 holes, just kind of lines up. So it just seemed like a tool in search of a problem kind of a thing, Well, and plus, I think for a lot of woodworkers, dowel joinery in itself seems kind of gimmicky. that you should be using dovetails or mortise and tenon or whatever. But I've used this jig in I don't know how many things, in whether it's using it as a joint or if nothing else, just to put a dowel in a complex assembly just to register parts, for some other kind of joinery to back up or to interlock pieces or things like that. It's just been really nice. I made a nightstand for my brother and sister-in-law, or end table, I guess it was, and it was a mid-century design, and the feet that I had on it, the way it was cut, and I think it was just the function of the wood that I had, seemed kind of brittle, that the legs snapped off in a move. It was a clean break and long grain, but they wanted a way to be able to kind of index those parts together. So we ended up using that doweling jig. You just drill 2 holes into one side. You have the fence that automatically registers it on the other side, drill 2 more holes. And then, you had this thing back together and it looks great. And so that was kind of a surprise. And it was another one of those things where it was kind of like an impulse buy, where it's like, it doesn't really cost that much, and, I'll give it a shot. And now it's like, I go out of my way sometimes to use it, knowing that it's going to work as well as it does.
Yeah. Well, and there's a point to some tools where it's like, it's better just to be like, that's as simple doweling jig as you can get, right? Like, you get some of these jigs, like I have the Dowel Max downstairs. It's like the Inspector Gadget of jigs. Everything moves, and it's like trying to assemble Optimus Prime to get a stupid dowel joint together. So there's some times where it's like, that's the best solution. Something simple like that.
Yeah, where you're just lining it up to a pencil line, you clamp it in place, and you get going. Yep. So, I've just been surprised on how well it works. I made a set of doors to cover built-ins for friends of ours, and I wanted a way to just quickly make the doors. So, but I didn't, like cope and stick router bits, they don't make a big enough tenon, in my opinion, to be a strong door. So I just used dowels on the corners. Depending on how wide the pieces were, I could do 2 or 3 or whatever. Yep. And then used a slot cutter to route a slot for the panels. And, you're going from sticks to door in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah.
The other one is a biscuit joiner.
Okay. This
is an old school one that I inherited from my dad when he got a newer model. This is the old Porter Cable 555, I think is what it is. Yep. And again, biscuit joinery seems like one of those things where it was a gimmicky tool and technique, but I found it to be kind of invaluable for plywood projects.
Yeah.
Where it simplifies sizing of parts. You're just kind of like cutting them to length. You don't have to take into account joinery and that kind of stuff. And I used it for kitchen cabinets at my old house. There were a lot of places where I just, I built those out of melamine, the shells, the carcasses, just because the melamine on the inside was white, easy to clean, bright. But you need a decent way to join it together. And there's no way you're going to cut like tongue and dado joints in melamine and not, expect it to last very long. So it's nice because it's kind of like a butt joint, but there are things that register it together, and you have the glue strength of the biscuits that are in there. Sometimes you can reinforce that with screws, and then you have kind of like the best of both worlds, that you can just keep moving with a project without having to wait for the glue to cure all the way. And so,
yeah, I've found that I really like using biscuits, not only with gravy, but also when I'm building tabletops.
Oh,
like gluing up wide, solid wood tabletops, it works great. Just slap a couple biscuits inside of each board or inside each joint, glue up 3 or 4 boards at a time, let them dry, and then you can come back and do the entire top at once. So.
Right. Yeah. Because there you're using it to keep boards aligned over a long span. Because otherwise you're constantly putzing with clamps and pounding down proud joints and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's what I found is if I'm not using biscuits, I end up gluing 2 boards together at once, and then you're always trying to use cauls to keep them even and flush and all that jazz. And it's like, you know what? You throw a couple of biscuits in there, it self-registers. The biscuits, I'm in the camp that biscuits are not a terribly strong joint, really. They're more for alignment on a lot of things. I think they add some strength for sure, especially in like a plywood joint. But they just become a tool to help you keep everything aligned while you get clamps on.
Sure.
And then it doesn't matter that the biscuit's in there. So.
Oh yeah. Yep. So. And then my final one was a purchase. Again, it was an impulse purchase when I was at the last Handworks in Iowa, which moment of silence that the 2020 Handworks got canceled due to Corona. But this one, I have an affinity for old tools, and it's a folding 2-foot wood ruler. So not the flippy floppy 6-foot carpenter's kind of ruler, but all folded together. It's 6 inches long. It's got the rule joint on the corners, and then so you pivot it out and then flip down the two legs. And this one is only marked in eighths, and it's an old Lufkin model 551. But frankly, I don't need to be working, and I guess on one side it is down into 16ths, but honestly, I don't need to be working that precise in terms of measurements. You're more likely just to transfer lengths or part sizes. So, and that one's come in really handy because I found that I've been working more, using more steel rulers rather than like tape measures or the measuring tapes on tools, like table saws or bandsaws or something like that. I find it's just, it comes from working in the Woodsmith shop where the tools may or may not be calibrated to that particular blade and that particular rip fence. And
all of our tools are always calibrated all the time. Yeah.
Yep. So I end up using wood or metal rulers. So I have shameless plug for the 6, 12, and 18-inch Woodsmith steel rulers. But sometimes you want something a little bit longer, and the fold-up ruler at 24 inches doesn't take up a huge amount of space. So I can kind of leave it near my bench without it, getting in the way. And I just use it a lot now. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It's funny because I actually have one of the Lufkin 6-foot fold-out ones that you're talking about, or 7-foot. Yeah. Might be 7-foot. I'm not sure. I'd have to go look. I use the crap out of that thing. I really like it for, I guess the time I find myself using it more often than not is when I'm laying out parts on roughs on board.
Sure.
I'll have that out and I'll be marking, hey, I know I need 1 3/4 style. I'm going to mark 2 inches so I have some room to make cuts. It works great for that. I love those. I love those old style rulers. And a lot of times some of them can be inaccurate. I have a old hand engraved carpenter square.
Sure.
That is, it's like over the 24 inches, it's off by like 3/4 of an inch, at least according to everything else I own, which I guess doesn't really matter if you're using the same reference every time. But yeah, I love some of those. I was trying to find if one of my favorite tape measures is a old steel case Starrett tape measure.
Oh.
And I was like, I wonder if Starrett ever made a really nice, like 12-foot tape measure, like all steel one. I haven't been able to find one, so if anybody listening knows of any or any model numbers from Starrett, I would love to hear it, because I feel like the old time measuring tools were built better than what we have today.
So I think that's it for that I've thought of for kind of gimmicky tools that I never thought that I would use that often.
Yeah, we have to find somebody that uses the mortising attachment for a drill press. I want to see if that actually works. Does it work?
There we go.
Yes.
Does it
I
work or
use
does it
one.
not work?
And I actually, I was debating whether to include that one because that one is such a third rail of discussions. I had gotten one from Ted Rafe, who used to work here, because I bought his drill press when he got a new one.
Sure.
And that mortising attachment didn't work with the new one that he had. And he was, before he was an editor for Woodsmith, he had his own furniture making business for like 20, 25 years, something like that.
Okay.
And that was the way he made mortises, was with the drill press attachment on his drill press. So much so that he actually pretty much left the yoke for that on his drill press all the time.
Okay.
So then it was relatively easy to go back and forth. Now I don't do that, but I think there's a lot to be said for it. I've done mortises, did an entry door for my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's house, 1/2-inch mortises in cherry, and it worked just fine. They were like 2.5 inches deep, plowed right through it.
Sure.
There's a lot to be said for learning how to set it up right. I think, it's kind of like combination tools, power tools,
Sure.
The changeover takes so long. It's really not that big of a deal, in terms of how fast. Like I can go from drill press to mortising in, 3 minutes, maybe.
Sure. Which is how long it takes me to clean off the mortising machine at work and drag it out, and find the right bits and sharpen them and all that. So yeah, not bad.
And you're still, and that's just installing the yoke on the drill press and getting a bit installed, or basically just getting the yoke installed. And then I made a dedicated mortising fence for my drill press so I could use the hold down with it.
Yeah.
I didn't, the ones that come with it are designed just to go in the metal stock table of a drill press, and I just don't have that. So I think that's where the mortising attachment falls down, is how lame that fence is.
Sure.
But otherwise everything else is the same, like installing a bit, installing an auger. That doesn't matter whether you have a standalone mortising machine or a drill press one. You still have to do all those same setup things.
Yeah.
One advantage, you don't get the same kind of leverage, because a dedicated mortising machine usually has a big long handle on it. But, between setup and using like a spray bit and blade lubricant, that really improves things. And
Gotcha.
Sharp bits. So I like it. I love it.
Okay,
it just
cool.
works. It works really well, and for the most part, like let's be honest, we're not doing mortises all day long.
No.
And it saves space in a shop too. So
Yeah. Well, and that's, I bought Eric, one of our other editors, I guess our other editor, there's only 3 of us. I bought his Delta mortiser probably 6 months ago, and it's sitting in my basement still. I haven't used it.
Yeah.
At some point I will. So.
Yeah. No, I keep thinking that I'd love to get a standalone mortiser, but it's the same thing. It's like I don't use it all the time, and I build a good amount of traditional style furniture, but they're super handy. I like it. Yep. So I will be out there to change anybody's mind that wants to about that. I feel like a lot of the people who dismiss the drill press mortising attachment are people that have a humongous freestanding, not benchtop mortiser.
Sure. Yep.
And B, have never used the drill press mortiser for any amount of time, other than to like, hey, I wonder how this works. And they set it up once and it took a while.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
It's like comparing a construction truck to El Camino. It's like, they're sort of the same, but they're not trying to do the same jobs. It's just.
Until they're made to do the same job.
Same jobs. Yeah.
All right, what are you guys working on? John, what are you working on? Is the fortress done?
Yeah, I've kind of been putting it off, I guess. We went through that like week of like it rained every other day, so I didn't really do much, and then now it's gone straight from the 75-degree weather and a little bit of rain to 93 degrees and humid, but I got to get back out there probably this weekend and get a roof on that thing. And the problem is that it's all functional right now, so the kids are pretty content to play on it and stuff. So they're not motivating me as much. But yeah, I need to get out there this weekend, get the roof on, and then we'll be a little bit further down the road. So
So they are loving it.
Oh yeah, they love it. They're out there all the time. They have the grass worn out under the swings and the bottom of the slide already, and
perfect.
So
say it's gonna be nice out this weekend. What was your saying yesterday in the video studio? Skies out, thighs out.
Skies out, thighs out. Yeah. Break up the short shorts.
Yep, better get out there and finish it.
Gotta build that face burn on my legs.
Yeah.
Phil?
I have a couple of things that I'm going on right now. I finally came up with a design for my router table fence for my little compact router, channeling my inner Pat Warner, the kind of router geek of the internet for a long time. So I'll take a couple of photos with that, and I'll put that with the show notes page for this episode. You can see that. Because I wanted something that had a smooth, continuous fence, easy to adjust. But since it's for a small router, I felt like I wanted something that had a micro adjust feature to it. Yep. So without having to, because it seems like sometimes you loosen the fence on, any router design, and just the act of loosening and or tightening changes it way too much. And it, so I just wanted something that I could just make fine controlled measurements on it without being super complicated, because you can go bananas pretty easily.
Yeah.
You can, and we've seen this with our own projects, and I think in our own shops where you can outsmart yourself in a very short amount of time and over engineer something. So.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm kind of satisfied with it where it is now. I just have to, I think I have to install a couple of threaded inserts, and then I'm going to paint part of it to match the router table, because I'm that kind of person that paints his stuff so that stuff in your workshop kind of looks similar.
No, I don't disown you for that at all. I agree.
So, and then I did a project, that nightstand project. I made that out of basswood, and I had a bunch of basswood left over, so I glued it up into a blank and then cut it round, and I'm going to make a kind of a carved, sculpted model of the Dragon SpaceX capsule that recently launched. So
cool.
I had done one last year for the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing, so I thought it seemed kind of fitting to do a newer one.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Cool. How's your rabbit plane coming?
I'm kind of stalled out on the shoulder plane because I wore out the belt on my belt sander. Like, it was cutting phenomenally, and it's just this constant spray of brass, because we used like a nice free cutting brass on that project. But then all of a sudden I realized, like, I'm spending a lot of time here and I don't really see a lot of difference. And then I felt the sanding belt on there, and it's like, oh, that's why.
Oh, it's emery cloth.
Yeah. So it's very highly polished right now. It's still a little too thick. And so I got to get like a 5-pack of belts or something like that. But just haven't done it yet.
Well, I got my, this poker table. God, this thing has been freaking dragging. Do you guys ever get those projects just drag on, and you just, it's like I'm working on it 3, 4, 5 days a week. Like, not full days, obviously, because I'm doing magazine stuff, but like it's just here and there, and it just is dragging on. But I got it completely sanded last night. I got it into the garage with my wife's help, thankfully, and got the first coat of, the only coat of Sealacell on the top. The base is in the spray booth right now, and it's sprayed. It's been lacquered. The top will get lacquered tomorrow, and then I can slap it together. So I'm pretty excited to wrap that up. And I think Sunday I'm gonna finally present it to them. So that'll be fun. It's kind of like when you finish one of these projects for somebody, you get attached to it. It's like fostering that puppy, and then it's time for it to go back to its forever home, and you just don't want to let it go, but you know it's for the best because you don't play poker. So
right.
So my wife was like, "Oh, can we just put a tabletop on that and just put it in our kitchen?" I was like, "Yeah, you tell that to our friends."
Yeah,
because...
you're like, this is a pretty involved table for chutes and ladders.
Exactly. So, but no, this weekend I had my first paying sawing jobs, so that was fun with the sawmill. So I went out to one of our coworkers at our cooking magazine, Cuisine. She texted me and said, "Hey, my neighbor had a walnut tree taken down. Do you want this small section of stump that's left?" And it was like a crotch. It was, I don't know, 5 foot long and maybe 28 inches wide. So I was like, heck yeah, I'll come out and saw it. And ended up that I had 2 other jobs. Haley did not pay me to saw that. That was more of a, hey, come get it if you want it. And I was going to be out sawing anyways. But then I had a guy that had a handful of ash logs that they had a tree taken down, or they actually had a tree trimmed, which... Don't get me started on the whole limbwood thing, because these were all limbs of an ash tree, which doesn't make the best lumber, but I think they'll be okay for the outdoor type benches he was wanting to make. So sawed those up for him, and then I had another guy that he had a walnut tree taken down last year in his backyard over by the fairgrounds in Des Moines, and the whole thing was laying there still. The limbs had been taken off and cut up to firewood, but the whole trunk from the first crotch all the way down to the butt was all there, and he had peeled the bark off. Yeah, I know. You can say it, John.
Woodworking's funny.
I know it is. So from the crotch to the butt was there, and the guy had. It's funny. I don't think a lot of people don't realize how long a log will stay wet. Like, he's like, when it came down, I took the bark off so it would dry. It's like, yeah, you're not. I mean, he did do one thing by doing that. He kept bugs from getting in it, because the bugs won't touch it once the bark's gone. They don't, they won't touch it. So he kept the bugs out of it. But it's like, yeah, it's not dry. I'm sorry, man. It's, we'll cut it up and you'll feel it, but it's going to be very wet still. You're still going to need to let it dry. But we cut it up, and that was fun getting it positioned, just with how his driveway and the tree laid out. It was interesting getting it into position, but we cut the top section, then went to the butt section, which the butt section had a good 30-inch crotch right where a limb started, maybe 3 feet off the ground. Yes, I know. I see you smirking.
I'm just watching John.
Oh, I know.
There's one ready to fire.
I know there is. But it was
fourth grader.
we trimmed that limb off so it would fit on the mill. We got it up there, and I told the guy up front, I was like, hey, it's like, here's the deal, for me to come out and mill, it's $60 an hour, which is basically covering the cost of the mill and my gas. And I said, if we hit nail in the tree, it's $25 for the blade. It's basically how it breaks down. It's like, if we don't hit wood, great, you don't own anything for the blade, or if we don't hit metal, you don't own anything for the blade. But if we do, it is what it is, right? He said, yeah, that's fine. He's like, if we're gonna run into metal, it's obviously gonna be that base. And it's like, yeah, that's where it's gonna be. So we made probably 6 cuts on the log, about a little over halfway through the log, flipped the log over because that helps balance some of the tension in the wood. And the very first skim cut, man, I couldn't have taken more than an 1/8 of an inch off the bark. We hit a head of a nail. Like, just, you're pushing along and it just goes zink, and it's like, oh yeah, that was a nail. And he looked at me and I was like, yep, there it is. So we we found where this nail was buried, and it was maybe a foot from the base of a foot from where the tree had been cut. And he's like, you know what, let's just cut that end off with the chainsaw. And I was like, okay. So we just chopped that end off. And I said, okay, so here's the deal. I just took the bark off this side. I was like, do you want me to switch? It's up to you. You've paid for this blade already. Do you want me to go and make my final cuts with this blade, knowing that the blade's going to wander a little bit? Or do you want me to put a fresh blade on, knowing that we might hit more metal? And he's like, you know what? He's like, let's go ahead and just make this next cut with that blade that's on there and see what we find. And I think that pass, we found 3 nails. And that left us with about a 5-inch thick slab. And that 5-inch thick walnut was probably 26 inches wide. I mean, it was big.
Oh, man.
And long. And I'm like, there's no way we're going to lift this. I was like, we have to do something with this. Either we chainsaw it in half, or I was like, you know, the blade's still cutting okay. It's still cutting. It's not cutting okay. It's cutting.
Right.
I was like, we can make one more pass right down the center if you want, and we'll just end up with what we end up with. And he said, yeah, let's do that. And we hit 13 more nails in that very center of the tree. It's like they're all in an area about that big. It had to have been like a treehouse ladder step or something that was nailed on at some point. They just shot a bunch of nails into a 2x4 to get a step up or something. But man, it's like, oh, that's the first real metal I've found. I mean, I've hit some copper wire, and that doesn't do anything because it's soft.
Right.
But you definitely know when you hit a hardened nail and sparks go flying, and you hear that zing as the blade goes through it. So I don't think it damaged the blade at all, besides dulling it really bad. So I'll have to have it sharpened. But
so you can have those blades sharpened then?
Oh yeah. I think they say the blades on this are, I think, 1.25 inches wide.
Okay.
And they said that they can sharpen them down till they're 7/8 of an inch.
Oh, okay.
So basically it ends up being, you can get like 10 sharpenings out of a blade.
Oh, that's not bad.
No, it's not bad. It's almost a wash on whether you sharpen them or just order a box of new blades, because a box of 10 blades, I think, is about $250 plus shipping. So maybe, $270. Yeah. But getting the blades sharpened is like $14 a piece.
Oh.
Shipping. So it's like you do save a little bit by having them sharpened. So I will probably I'll probably wait till I'm down to like 2 or 3 good sharp blades, and then I'll send the rest of them in to have them sharpened. So
yeah. Now, do you send them back to Norwood? Are there local places that'll do that, or?
We have a couple of local places in Des Moines that do tool sharpening. I don't know if they do bandsaw blades.
Yeah.
I can send them to Norwood. There's a handful. Basically, any of the big mill manufacturers will sharpen blades, and they don't care what brand they are. And also, that reminds me. They do sell sharpeners for at home as well.
Sure.
However, we happen to have a semi-evil genius named Chris Fitch that could probably rig one up pretty easily for me. So
probably. I know, because when I've done bandsaw seminars and instruction, people invariably ask about sharpening bandsaw blades, just regular shop bandsaw blades. And I think, like old sharpening books that we have in our library, they talk about doing that, but that just seems like it's a super flexible blade. There's 85,000 teeth on it, and then I saw one guy. He's on Instagram, Clark Kellogg. He's out of Houston. On his bandsaw, he was using a Dremel tool. Yeah. To just touch up the blade, just real quick. Not being super precise with it, but just kind of putting a fresh edge on each tooth. And he'd leave it on the bandsaw, and then just kind of, mark his starting point, and then just kind of, and then move the blade by hand, and then, do half dozen or a dozen teeth. He said he can usually do that 2 or 3 times before, you start losing your geometry and the set and all that kind of stuff. But,
yeah. Well, and it's they do sell some of those. They sell some manual bandsaw blade sharpeners for mills that use a Dremel. And those are fairly inexpensive. I think they're a couple $100 for one. The bigger ones that actually shape the tooth and remove some of the material from the gullet, which is the big thing. As you're starting to sharpen, you want to keep that gullet depth to keep clearing sawdust.
Right.
Those are between $900 and $2,000. So you'd have to sharpen a lot of blades to pay for it. But if you were, if I was sawmilling full time, then sure, it might be worth it. But it kind of surprised me. I spend more money on my 105-inch blades for my Powermatic bandsaw than I do for the sawmill that is 167 inches. You know what I mean? And I think it just has all to do with the size of the teeth, because that big blade doesn't have that many teeth. Yeah, it's like, I think it's one tooth every 7/8 of an inch, So
plus you're buying in bulk. It's a lot of bandsaw blade there.
That is true. So, yeah, they're fun to coil and uncoil. That's for sure. Because with the smallest bandsaw blade, it's like, okay, I can feel there's tension there, but there's not that much. With one of these big ones, there's a lot of tension there, and I'm not going to stop it if it goes.
Oh my goodness, that would be like wrestling a porcupine.
Basically, yeah. Yep, porcupine that can reach its arms all the way around you.
Right. The unholy offspring of an anaconda and a porcupine.
All right.
Anything else you guys got working on? Things you're thinking about? John, what are you? You're down. You're in the office today.
I'm in the studio. Getting ready to fire up shooting again here for the TV show. So.
Cool. Yeah, we'll be starting that next week, and
did
some stuff in the video studio this week, being safe and distant from each other.
Yep.
Usually we're just distant from each other.
Right.
Now we're being safe too.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was kind of funny, just commuting, because I haven't been out driving much at all during this time, and it just felt weird. And then to be down in the studio with you guys, it was odd, because it was the same but yet different. We're all doing this.
We were odd.
Yeah. Yeah. Just doing this dance to be like, okay, we're not going to be close to each other, and wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah.
Pretty weird.
Yep, that's right. We like the weird.
Yeah. We embrace the weird.
The weird. Have you ever talked to us, Phil?
Keep the Woodsmith shop weird.
Yep.
All right. I think that wraps up today's episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. If you enjoy listening to the ShopNotes Podcast, we'd love it for you to leave a rating and a review wherever you find your podcasts. It helps us to know that we're being listened to besides our family. And it also helps with better reviews to get the word out to other woodworkers. So if you want to share this podcast with other woodworkers, you can do that by leaving 5-star reviews and good ratings for us. And please check out our notes page on our website at woodsmithshop.com. You'll find a listing there for the podcast, and where you'll be able to see photos and links to some of the other stuff that we've been talking about, especially if you haven't seen it, the video version of it. And we're also on YouTube, putting the ShopNotes Podcast there as well, so you can watch the whole thing in all its sausage-making glory.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects. You can find it all in Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.